The day I helped my new neighbor move in, I had grease on my hands, a cold cup of coffee on the counter, and absolutely no intention of letting anyone back into my life. It was a Saturday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide between gray and blue, and the air smells like dead leaves and somebody's fireplace 2 houses down. I was in my garage, pretending to fix something I didn't actually know how to fix, when I heard it, a thud, then another, then a frustrated sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, coming from the stairwell of the building next door. I told myself not to look. I looked. She was standing at the bottom of an outdoor staircase. One cardboard box balanced against her knee. Another one tipped over on the ground, papers sliding out across the wet concrete. No moving truck. No help. Just her, a pile of boxes, and that staircase going up 3 flights like it was personally offending her. I don't know why I walked over. I wasn't looking for a project. I wasn't looking for a person. I had spent the last 14 months making sure I wasn't looking for anything at all. But I picked up the box. Her name was Claire. Claire Merritt. She shook my hand at the top of the 3rd floor, landing like we were closing a business deal, not standing in a hallway that smelled like old carpet and somebody else's cooking. She had paint on her left wrist and dark circles under her eyes and the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one bad night. It comes from a long stretch of them. We carried 6 loads up those stairs over the next 2 hours. We barely spoke. She said thank you at the door. I nodded and turned to leave. That's when she called my name. I stopped. She was holding something out toward me. Small, silver, catching the gray October light between her fingers. A house key. I stared at it, then at her. She said, I know this is strange, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say no. I should have said no right then. I should have smiled, handed the key back, walked downstairs, and gone back to my cold coffee and my pretend repair project. Instead, I stepped inside. Her apartment was almost empty. 1 folding chair, a lamp on the floor without a shade. Boxes stacked against the wall like she hadn't decided yet whether she was staying or already planning to leave. She didn't offer me anything to drink. She just stood in the middle of that bare room with her arms crossed and told me the truth. Her name wasn't just Claire Merritt anymore. Legally, it was still Claire Hargrove. Her ex-husband's name. And her ex-husband, a man named Daniel Hargrove, was the reason she had moved here with 6 boxes and no furniture and a look on her face like she was waiting for something bad to find her again. Daniel wasn't violent. That wasn't the problem. The problem was worse in a quieter way. He was methodical, patient, the kind of man who didn't break things. He just slowly convinced you that everything broken was your fault. They had been separated for 8 months. The divorce was supposed to be finalized in 3 weeks. But Daniel had filed a motion to contest the settlement. And the settlement included one thing Claire could not lose. Her daughter, Lily, 4 years old, brown eyes, obsessed with dinosaurs, currently staying with Claire's mother in Ohio while Claire got herself settled. Daniel's lawyer had submitted paperwork arguing Claire was unstable. No permanent residence. No stable support system. No evidence of community ties. Claire had 3 weeks to prove otherwise. She looked at me across that empty apartment and said, I need someone who can vouch for me. A neighbor. Someone who can say I'm not alone here. Someone who can be. She paused, choosing the word carefully. Present. I said, present how? She said, present enough that when Daniel's investigator drives by, they don't see a woman living alone with no one checking on her. I looked at the key still sitting on the counter between us. I said, you want me to pretend? She said, I want you to help me keep my daughter. The room was so quiet I could hear the couple arguing 2 floors below us. I picked up the key. I want to be honest with you right now because this is the part where most people would judge me, or judge her. And I understand that. What she was asking wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It sat in a gray area that a lawyer would have a long conversation about. But I had met men like Daniel Hargrove before. Not him specifically. The type. The kind of man who never raises his voice because he doesn't have to. The kind of man who wins by making you doubt yourself so completely that you forget what winning even looks like. I knew that type because I had watched my sister survive one. So I said yes. But I set one rule. I told Claire, I'll be present. I'll be visible. I'll answer the door when someone knocks, and I'll be a name someone in this building knows. But you don't lie to me. Not once. Not about anything. If I ask you something, you tell me the truth. Because the moment I find out I've been used differently than you're telling me right now, I walk. And I won't feel bad about it. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. No lies. I nodded back. No lies, I said. We shook hands again. Same as the landing. Business deal. I left her apartment and walked downstairs and stood in my garage for a long time, staring at a key I hadn't asked for, wondering what exactly I had just agreed to. And listen, if you're still with me right now, stay with me. Because what happened over the next 3 weeks was nothing like what either of us expected. Not even close. And it started the very next morning. The next day was Sunday. I was making eggs at 7:15 when I heard a knock. Soft, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they had the right to knock. I opened the door. Claire was standing in the hallway in a gray sweatshirt, holding a paper bag. She said, I brought bagels. I didn't know if you'd eaten. You don't have to let me in. I stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table and pulled out 2 bagels and a small container of cream cheese and set them down like she had done it before. Like this was already a habit. Like we weren't 2 strangers who had known each other for less than 24 hours. I put coffee on without asking if she wanted some. She didn't ask if I took sugar. She just pushed the cup toward me when it was done. Black, because she had apparently noticed the way I drank it the day before without me saying a word. We sat there for 40 minutes. We talked about almost nothing. She told me she used to teach 2nd grade before Lily was born. I told her I did residential contracting. She asked if I was good at it. I said good enough to know when something's held together wrong. She smiled at that. Small. Like she was trying not to. When she left, she said, same time tomorrow? I said, I'll have the coffee ready. That was how it started. Not dramatic. Not electric. Just a table and 2 cups and a Sunday morning that felt, for the first time in 14 months, like something worth waking up for. But it wasn't simple. It was never going to be simple, because 3 days later Daniel showed up. Not at her door. At mine. I heard the knock at 8 in the evening. I opened the door and there was a man in a dark jacket standing under my porch light with the kind of smile that doesn't reach his eyes. He said his name was Marcus. He said he was a friend of Claire's. He said he just wanted to make sure she was settling in okay. He wasn't a friend. I knew it before he finished the sentence. He was looking past me into my apartment, clocking everything. The layout, the shoes by the door, whether there was 1 coffee cup on the counter or 2. I said, she's doing great. Good neighborhood. Good people. You can tell whoever sent you that she's got plenty of both. His smile got a little tighter. He said, and you are. I said, her neighbor. The one who knows which cars belong on this street and which ones don't. He left. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a moment. Then I texted Claire 2 words. He came. She called me 30 seconds later. I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. She said, Marcus works for Daniel's lawyer. He's done this before. He did it at my last apartment. That's why I moved. I said, how many times is he going to come back? She said, until he finds something. I said, then we make sure there's nothing to find. What I didn't say, what I couldn't say yet even to myself, was that it was starting to feel less like a performance and more like something I actually meant. Stay with me, because this is the part where I made a mistake. A real one. And it almost cost Claire everything. The mistake happened in the 2nd week. Claire had a phone call with her lawyer on a Wednesday afternoon. I didn't ask about it. I had learned by then that she would tell me things when she was ready and not a minute before. She had that quality, a kind of careful dignity about what she shared and when. I respected it, even when it made me impatient. But that evening, she came down to my apartment and she looked wrong. Not sad. Something harder than sad. Flat. Like someone had taken the light out of a room by flipping a switch. I asked her what happened. She said the lawyer told her Daniel's team had found something. An old record from 5 years ago. A wellness check. Claire had called a crisis line after a miscarriage, her first pregnancy, before Lily, and someone had filed a report. Nothing happened. No action was taken. But it existed on paper. And Daniel's lawyer was going to use it. I said something I shouldn't have said. I said, "Why didn't you tell me about this?" She went very still. I heard how it sounded the second it left my mouth. Like I was Daniel. Like I was cataloging her history, looking for inconsistencies, deciding whether she was worth believing. She stood up. She said, "Because it was mine. Because not everything that happened to me is information you're owed." She left. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the 2 cups on the counter. Hers still half full. Getting cold. I went upstairs and knocked on her door. When she opened it, I didn't make excuses. I said, "You're right. I'm sorry. What you went through before I knew you is yours. I had no right to ask for it like that." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider and let me in. We sat on the floor of her apartment. She had a couch by then, but we both ended up on the floor anyway, and she told me about the miscarriage. Not because I asked. Because she chose to. And that was the difference. That was everything. She talked for almost an hour. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most useful thing you can be for someone is just completely, quietly there. When she was done, she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. She said, "How do we fight this?" I said, "You walk into that courtroom and you let them show that paper. And then your lawyer explains exactly what it means. That a woman going through grief picked up the phone and asked for help instead of going silent. That's not instability. That's strength. And any judge worth anything will see it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you actually believe that?" I said, "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't." She opened her eyes and looked at me, and something shifted in that room. Something quiet and serious and irreversible. Neither of us named it. The court date was a Thursday. 2.5 weeks after the Saturday she handed me a key. I drove her there. She wore a dark blue dress and a coat she had pressed the night before. She was calm in the car. Too calm. The kind of calm that lives right next to terror. At the courthouse steps, she stopped. She said, "You don't have to come in." I said, "I know." I came in. I sat in the back of the courtroom and I watched Claire Hargrove, sit at that table with her lawyer and face a man who had spent 8 months trying to convince a judge and everyone around her that she wasn't capable of being a mother. Daniel sat across the room in a dark suit. He looked composed, prepared, like a man who had already decided how the day was going to go. He hadn't accounted for Claire. She testified for 40 minutes. She talked about the apartment, the neighborhood, her job offer, a teaching position starting in January. She talked about the community she was building. Her lawyer brought up the wellness check. Claire addressed it directly, without flinching, without looking at Daniel, without asking anyone's permission. She said, "I made a call because I was in pain and I knew I needed help. I would make that same call again. That's what I want my daughter to know. That when things get hard, you reach out. You don't go quiet." The judge asked her one question. He said, "Ms. Merritt, do you have a stable support system in your current residence?" Claire looked straight at the judge. And then she looked at me, just for a second, in the back of that room. And she said, "Yes, I do." The judge took a recess. 30 minutes. And I'm telling you, those were the longest 30 minutes of my life. Stay with me. We're almost there. We sat in a hallway outside the courtroom on a wooden bench. Claire had her hands folded in her lap, very still, staring at the floor tiles. I said, "You did everything right in there." She said, "I know. I just need him to see it." I said, "He saw it." She looked at me then, really looked. She said, "Why are you here, Marcus? I mean, why are you really here? Not the agreement. Not the favor. Why are you here?" I thought about the honest answer for a moment. I said, "Because 14 months ago my life got very quiet and very small, and I had gotten used to it. I had convinced myself that small was safe. That quiet meant nothing could hurt me. I paused. And then I heard a thud on a staircase and I looked when I told myself not to. And somewhere in the last 3 weeks the quiet stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like something I didn't want anymore. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then the courtroom doors opened. The judge ruled in Claire's favor. Full residential custody. Structured visitation for Daniel. A review in 6 months. Claire sat completely still when the ruling was read. Then she let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for 8 months. Her lawyer touched her arm. She nodded once. She didn't cry until we got outside. We were standing on the courthouse steps in the November cold, and she just stood there with her face in her hands for about 30 seconds. Not loud. Just finally letting something go. I didn't say anything. I just stood beside her. When she lifted her head, her eyes were red but she was almost smiling. She said, "Lily comes home on Saturday." I said, "Then we've got 2 days to make that apartment look like a home and not a storage unit." She laughed. The real kind. The kind that doesn't ask permission. On the drive back, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The key." I said, "What about it?" She said, "When I gave you that key, I told myself it was practical. Logical. Part of the plan." She looked out the window. "But I think I gave it to you because some part of me already knew. Some part of me that I wasn't listening to yet." I kept my eyes on the road. She said, "You can give it back. If you want. The arrangement is done. You held up everything you said you would. You don't owe me anything else." I reached into my jacket pocket. I set the key on the center console between us. She looked at it. Then I said, "I'm not giving it back." She turned to look at me. I said, "I'm keeping it because I want to. Not because we made a deal. Not because someone might be watching. Because last Sunday morning there were 2 cups of coffee on my table, and the apartment didn't feel empty for the first time in over a year, and I'm not interested in going back to 1 cup. The road was quiet. Late afternoon light coming through the trees. She reached over and picked up the key, and she put it back in my jacket pocket. She said, "Then you keep it." Lily came home on Saturday. She was small and loud and had a dinosaur backpack that was almost as big as she was. She ran into the apartment and immediately began a very serious inspection of every room, narrating everything she found like a tiny documentary filmmaker. I was standing in the doorway when she spotted me. She stopped, looked at me with the complete, unfiltered evaluation that only 4-year-olds are capable of. She said, "Are you the neighbor?" I said, "Yeah, I'm the neighbor." She thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know about dinosaurs?" I said, "I know a little." She grabbed my hand and pulled me inside. Claire was leaning against the kitchen counter watching this happen. When I looked at her, she had the kind of expression that people try to hide when they're afraid of how much they mean it. She didn't hide it fast enough. I didn't want her to. I'm not going to tell you that everything after that was easy. It wasn't. Real things never are. Daniel filed another motion 2 months later, and it took another 3 weeks and 1 more court date to settle it for good. There were evenings Claire cried at my kitchen table and mornings where Lily had nightmares and weekends where the weight of the whole past year came down on Claire all at once. But here's what I'll tell you. Every single one of those hard evenings, I was at that table. Every nightmare, there was a light on somewhere. Every heavy weekend, someone made coffee before the other person had to ask. That's what it looks like when something is real. Not perfect. Not easy. Just present. Consistently, stubbornly, quietly present. I had spent 14 months telling myself that small and quiet was protection. That keeping your life tight and controlled meant nothing could break it. What I didn't understand, what Claire taught me without ever meaning to, was that a life kept that small doesn't break. It just slowly stops being a life. She didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. That's not how it works. We don't save each other. We just sometimes show up on the right staircase on the right morning and pick up a box we weren't asked to carry. And that one small choice opens a door we didn't know was closed. I helped my neighbor carry boxes upstairs on a Saturday morning in October. She handed me a key. I thought she was asking for a favor. Turns out we were both just finally coming home. If the story stayed with you, If it made you feel something you needed to feel today, then hit that like button right now. Takes 2 seconds and it means more than you know. And if you're new here, subscribe because every week I bring you stories exactly like this one, real, human, and honest. I'll see you in the next one.